Actually, true story. What really inspired me to do law back in the day was extra pocket money from my mother. She basically said, join law school and I promise I will increase your pocket money, and you can maybe not go to law school by bus every day. Once a week, I will allow you to take the car. And I got very excited by the idea of all of this. And, I basically decided to join law school. So that's really what motivated me. But I think largely the reason why I thought that law would be a good career for me is because right after finishing high school, I did theater for a year. And I was, very intrigued by the idea that courtroom is nothing more than just knowing what to say and acting. So I thought, this is great. I want to do theater, and whatever little I have seen of law, this seems to be a good combination. Plus now my mother is happy to give me extra pocket money, so this is a win-win for everybody. So I enrolled in law school, not to forget the fact that my pocket money was never increased and I traveled by buses every single day, so all the incentives actually never played out, but I ended up becoming a lawyer. Colombia overall was fantastic, right? I think there are two big takeaways as far as a master's program are concerned, and Colombia for me fulfilled or sort of checked on both of them. One, and I was very clear about this before even applying for my master's program, and I didn't go right after law school. So I worked for about 3.5, 4 years before I applied. And I was very clear that I want to go to a school that has a good alumni network, because I want to be part of a network of people where, I can meet more interesting people, and I don't want to look at my LLM as just a 1 year sort of course that I have enrolled in, but really try and see what it can give me. I mean, pretty much, for lack of a better word, for the rest of my life. So that was one criteria. And B, I was looking at a few courses, researching on professors, things that I was interested in, and Columbia essentially offered all of that. And of course, you get to live in New York, which is, just a sort of cherry on the cake in that sense. But I think the biggest takeaway for me from my master's program really has been the network that I've been a part of. And this network is essentially of lawyers across the globe. You don't realize the value of that network when you're a younger lawyer, when you're fresh out of perhaps even your LLM. But over a period of time, as your career evolves, you realize that network that LLM program offers you really helps even in your career trajectory, right? So today I have friends who are law firm partners in Germany, in Japan, in the US, in South Africa, in England, in Singapore, and we do so much work with each other because there is that inherent friendship and trust. And of course, the lowest common denominator when you're trying to do work for anybody is that you know the law. So given all these factors, everything plays out really well. So I think I would say the network that one has managed to build in West of friends across the globe has really been my biggest takeaway from the LLM. Working with startups is actually very exciting because they come to you with queries that sometimes you yourself have not thought about. So I would say that my joke often when I'm sitting down with founders is that, wow, that guys, I get to learn so much from you in the process of advising you. But this is a great equation because I'm getting to learn and getting paid. So it's actually, it's actually quite interesting in that sense. But I think largely when you work with founders, when you work with entrepreneurs, you realize one, they're extremely passionate about businesses and they want everything else to really run on autopilot and things to work. And I always tell them that my job as an advisor to them, and this is where I always tell them that we also use this expression in our firm name, which is legal counselors, right? We also sit as counselors. Sometimes you're not really adding value legally, but they get a lot of comfort when you're around counseling them on simple aspects of their business. And what they expect is, especially in early days, you're able to handhold them. You're able to help them navigate the uncertain territories of regulation, laws, risks, and you have to explain it to them in extremely simple words. So for me, that part has been really exciting because one, you get to learn so much about a business, and B, you are working with founders from day zero and sometimes even day -1 when they're even just sort of evaluating whether they should start this business or not. And I've been very lucky to actually see some entrepreneurs, some founders, where I've been part of their pre-incorporation without even knowing what form and shape the business is going to take. And some of them have taken their companies to $1 billion valuations. Some have even IPO'd. So to see that entire journey and having been part of that is really exciting. And in terms of, like I said, challenges, you have to, they come to you and they want you to be as cost effective as possible. And as an advisor, you obviously have to think of it in terms of how are you going to manage that relationship in the long term. And it has its ups and downs, because you start working with founders will raise money, investors will come in, lawyers will come in, your role will sort of go down. But over a period of time, if you've honestly done your job, if you've worked in a very, very transparent manner, looked out for the founders, you will realize that you will become the founders' trusted advisors over a period of time and be part of that entire journey with them, which honestly I find a lot more fulfilling. So to that extent, I think the trust that you end up building with founders as part of their journey has been really rewarding and fulfilling for me. And in terms of, like I said, challenges, to be able to explain to them complex legal situations, from negotiating M&A deals, from raising money, employment disputes, ESOP related crisis, explaining to them the importance of good paperwork. And I have never advocated that you spend too much money on lawyers or on legal issues, because there is a right time in every startup's journey as to when they should spend what kind of money on what kind of problem. And I think founders really respect that, when you're not really going to them to do that one transaction to make money, but really sort of, like I said, hand-holding them, which is challenging but rewarding. And I think that for me has been, like I said, the most challenging yet rewarding part of working with Zoom. The key, stay up to speed with anything that's going on in the tech ecosystem right now, because things are evolving as of yesterday. You think you know something, but something else has happened in the world which is completely changing the way you're approaching technology. So the key really is to stay up to speed and keep reading. I do that a lot. In fact, I would say on an average spend about 45 minutes to an hour every single, including weekends, reading on something that I don't know. And one of the things that I actually have started doing, and I have to also admit I'm not very consistent with it, but whenever I get a chance, and often when I pick a very interesting subject, this ends up happening, is that when I drive to work and I drive back from work back home, I try and pick interesting podcasts about different tech topics, issues. And I'll give you an example. Yesterday, people are talking about artificial intelligence, generative AI, etc. And I was listening to this podcast by two guys who are data scientists and who were explaining the code as to how AI actually works and what is the difference between AI as we traditionally know and generative AI from a software developer's perspective. What do they do differently? And as a lawyer, you often don't think about that, but that perspective is very important when you're also advising clients on aspects of ethics as far as AI is concerned. When you're sitting with their business team and letting them know that, guys, what are the 5-6 key principles you need to incorporate when you're working on any AI tool. And those guys also simplify the more technical aspects of software development for you in a way that you can understand. And then you need to, I guess this also comes with experience, you need to be able to add 1 + 1 and say, hey, I've learned something very interesting which otherwise I wouldn't have. Now let me fit that into my practice and see what's the big takeaway I can give for my clients. And once I was done listening to that podcast, I remember last night post dinner spoke to a client that's working in that space, and then we engaged further. And a lot of people sometimes discount that is really from your client. You will be surprised, even though you're the external lawyer, when you sit in a meeting, you're the one who's expected to speak. If you just listen to hear but don't listen to respond, you will realize how much there is to learn from your clients. And that knowledge you can actually use so extensively with other clients and even in advising that client. So I think these two sources for me have been incredible. And like I said, I have learned so much from clients and of course from sources that I have tried to consciously make an effort to access. I think honestly, teaching happened by accident. I was not expecting this. One of the interns in our firm back in the day was, I think part of some committee in his law school, and we got a chance to engage on something. And he reached out to me and he said, "Sir, would you be interested in like coming to my law school and giving some sort of a expert lecture for whatever it was called?" Hardly an expert, but I said, "Sure, let's explore this." So I think the first encounter happened purely by chance, and I realized how interesting that was, because as lawyers we often get into the more sort of complex side of things, right? Like if I'm working on an M&A transaction, when was the last time I actually had to sit down and talk about like really sort of 101 of due diligence or basics? In perhaps like on very rare occasions, do you really need to get into basics, or do you really need to explain to somebody, how funds flow, how money trail is tracked by the RBI, etc., etc.? I mean, anything that's involved in a transaction, or what are the basics of an escrow. You don't really get into those kind of details, or at least I don't now when we are working on transactions. But it was very interesting because you also, when you're engaging with a lot of these students, you have to go down and to absolute basics, and then you just realize that there is so much that you also end up exploring, understanding, learning when you end up teaching. So for me, that first experience was very enriching from that perspective, and I think just the joy of sharing your learning with students. They ask incredible questions. I mean, I have to say, my first ever M&A session that I did at a law school was in Gujarat, and somebody got up and asked me about a reverse merger, and they explained the concept to me, which was about 80% correct. And I was telling them that I'm reasonably confident that even a third year associate at my firm would not know this. So how do you guys know so much? And what are your sources? And because there is just so much content available today to students over the internet, expert lectures are available, courses are available, and so people just take that much more initiative. So when you interact with these students, you also realize that it's not just a one-way dialogue. It's actually a two-way dialogue where they are engaging with you, correcting you sometimes, explaining concepts in a way that perhaps you could not explain it to them. And and that, I think, as a lawyer, it's one very, very enriching even for me. And like I said, just engaging with students is also a way of just, I guess, giving back to the fraternity, and perhaps making them engage with law firm partners or senior lawyers in a way that perhaps when we were students we didn't get a chance. So in terms of memorable cases, look, I am very personal about everything that I do. So I think in that sense, everything is personal and memorable. But if I had to pick on something, I would definitely say that one of the more challenging things that I've had a chance to do was back in 2015-16. I wouldn't call myself a young lawyer then, but I definitely wasn't very senior. And I had a chance to work in the e-pharmacy ecosystem much before the bigger companies had set up. And the whole regulatory framework was so gray. And I think that's the first time I started engaging with the regulators on a policy level, trying to help Indian companies who wanted to set up e-pharmacies be compliant with the Drugs and Cosmetics Act and the various laws. And then, there were all kinds of, I would say, things escalating all across the country, where there were people who did not want e-pharmacies to come in. So there were FIRs getting registered. There were people who wanted to set up e-pharmacies. And, we were all trying to collectively brainstorm and figure out the best business model that we could set up, which would be in compliance with the law as well, but also protect us should any of these FIRs escalate. So I think that entire piece, right, where you are not just looking at the law, you have to understand business realities. You have to understand the pressures that are being created overall in the ecosystem. At that point of time, public interest litigations were being filed, writ petitions were being filed. So it was a very, very active and a hot space. And I think from what it was, and I would definitely say I had a chance to be one of the first few or the early sort of lawyers to engage in that ecosystem, to how mature that market has now become. And I've had a chance to work with quite a few companies in that space. That's been a really, I would say, fulfilling experience. And I think another true story actually, which I always talk about when we talk about our engagement with the startup ecosystem and how naive I was as a young lawyer. And I think the best way to learn is by making mistakes, is the first ever transaction I worked on is when I was fresh out of law school. It was for a friend who was raising his first round of funding, and neither did he understand the nuances, but of course, like, he was much smarter than I was, and neither did I understand the nuances of how transactions have to be structured, did not know what put call options were, did not know what anti-dilution was, did not know what liquidation preference was. And so, and like, of course, you had Google, but you didn't get like sources where as a first year associate I could go and like understand what these concepts are. So you learned all of this through mistakes. And I remember that was a Series A round for somebody that I was working on, and made so many mistakes. I don't want to get into the mistakes, but made so many mistakes, but learned so much in the process that last year, that company, after a Series F round, did their IPO, and and I had been involved with them through that journey. So I think to see that entire cycle of making mistakes in the first round of funding, not knowing what any of those terms meant, to actually seeing that company do an IPO, that's been something really fulfilling. And I think what every lawyer will tell you is their biggest high, and is when you're working on anything. It could be a contract negotiation, a transaction, anything. When you're done with that work, and at some point of time, the counterparty approaches you and wants to engage you as their counsel because they were very happy with how you negotiated against them, that they now want you to represent them. I think that's a big high. And every time that has happened, I think in some sense it sort of validates what you're doing. And it's not necessarily just the knowledge of the law. Like I said, knowledge of the law is the lowest common denominator, right? Like, when as a lawyer you talk about work, you can't say you know the law more. That's a basic, that's a given. It's what you do over and above than knowing the law. And it could be anything. It could be just how you manage a negotiation, ethics, ethically doing something. Have you built a relationship where your client trusts you? And all of this plays out when you work in some form or the other. And I think when the opposite side comes and engages you, I think that itself is very fulfilling. And every time that happens, I think we end up taking a lot of pride in what we do. I would say don't stress. It works out. Enjoy law school. One of my biggest regrets from law school days is because we were always running around for internships and going and giving our resumes at every single firm, every other day, every other week, hoping that we'll get internships. I think we missed out on having a lot of fun in the law school. And my final year, I spent working, where after law school I would go to a law firm and intern, and I did that for almost like 4 or 5 months. And when I graduated, I honestly, it was great, you have a job, etc. But I really regretted not making the most of my time at law school, going out with friends, having fun, and just enjoying student life. So I would first start by saying, don't stress. Law school is to do everything. Internships, jobs are just a part of that. And I kid you not, I know people who have cried in their 5th year saying that they will never get jobs, but it's just a matter of time, and they all are doing incredibly well now. So it works out. And the other thing I would say, which I guess I've said before as well, is that make mistakes, because that's honestly the best way to learn anything. You will get yelled at, you will get shouted at, but it's just part of that journey. And whenever I get first year, second year associates at the law firm, and when we do their orientation induction, I always tell them, guys, don't question. Like, now is the time you should learn anything and everything that comes on your plate. Whether it's something you want to pursue eventually, whether it's something you don't want to pursue eventually, whether it's something you absolutely detest. You will get to a phase in your life where you will be able to make those choices. But right now, just enjoy the process and absorb as much as you can. And you'll make mistakes, you will mess up, but you will realize how all of that connects when you eventually look back at your life. So I would say those two things are very important. And today you have ample platform to learn, to acquire knowledge, to acquire additional skill sets. All of those are necessary. The field of law is not what it was 15-20 years ago. There is a lot of technology adoption that's come in. There's a lot of AI. People have to learn and evolve with the changing times. So of course, do all of that. And the ecosystem will enable it. You don't have to stand out. Your entire ecosystem will enable you to pick up these skill sets. But in the process, like I said, don't stop having fun and don't take too much stress, and continue making mistakes. You'll all be fine.